The day of Richard's funeral felt like the end of everything I had known. The house was filled with mourners, yet I had never felt more alone. My daughter, Isabella, barely looked at me. She stood beside her husband, Daniel, whispering with a smug smile, as though the service were nothing more than a formality. I tried to hold myself together, greeting neighbors and distant relatives, but deep down, my heart was breaking. When the last guests had left, I expected we would sit together as a family, grieving the man we had lost. Instead, Isabella stepped forward with a folder in her hands. Her tone was cold, almost rehearsed. "Mother, you can't stay here anymore. Father left everything to me. Here's the will." She slid the papers across the table as if she were dismissing an unwanted tenant. My legs felt weak as I picked up the documents. The legal words blurred before my eyes, but her meaning was clear enough. She claimed every dollar, every brick of the house, and even my right to stay in it. Daniel stood behind her, arms crossed, silent but radiating approval. When I tried to protest, Isabella's voice cut like a blade. "You've lived your life. Now it's my turn. Pack your things." That night, I found myself dragging a small suitcase through the rain, heading toward the only place I could afford, a shabby roadside motel. The neon light outside flickered, and the damp smell of the room clung to me like shame. For decades, I had given everything to my family. Now, after losing my husband, I had also lost my home, banished by my own child. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you loved most, tell me in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this story, because what happened next will shock you even more. The first night in that motel room was the longest of my life. The sheets were rough, the mattress sagged, and the air smelled of mold and cigarette smoke that no cleaner could erase. I lay awake listening to the hum of traffic outside and the occasional shout from another guest down the hall. For years, I had gone to bed in a warm, familiar house beside a husband I trusted. Now, I was here, stripped of dignity, cast out by my own flesh and blood. I cried until my throat ached. Every memory of Isabella as a little girl came rushing back, the way she once clutched my hand on her first day of school, the nights she curled up in bed beside me during storms. How had that little girl turned into the cold woman who told me to pack my things? By morning, I felt hollow. I shuffled into the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stared at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. My eyes were swollen, my hair a tangled mess, but beneath the exhaustion was something else: anger. Not wild, uncontrollable anger, but a slow, simmering fury that burned hotter with every passing second. I knew Richard had always been careful with money. He didn't trust anyone fully, not even our daughter, when it came to finances. The papers Isabella had shoved into my hands didn't sit right with me. I remembered Richard telling me more than once, "If anything happens to me, talk to Coleman. He knows everything." Coleman was our family lawyer for decades, a man Richard trusted implicitly. Clutching my purse, I left the motel that morning with a new determination. I took the bus into town, my hands trembling the entire ride. When I stepped into Mr. Coleman's office, I expected to be turned away, expected that maybe Isabella had already gotten to him. But when he looked up from his desk and saw me, his face softened with genuine concern. "Margaret," he said, rising to shake my hand, "I was just about to call you." That sentence alone gave me hope. I sat down across from him, explaining everything: how Isabella and Daniel had forced me out, how they presented me with what they claimed was Richard's will. Coleman listened intently, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. Then, without hesitation, he pulled a folder from his filing cabinet. "Your husband updated his will 6 months before his passing," Coleman said, "and I can assure you, what Isabella gave you was not it." I stared at him, breath caught in my throat. He laid the real document on the table, his finger tracing the key lines. According to Richard's actual will, I inherited the house and 70% of his assets, roughly $23 million. Isabella was left with $10 million, but under a strict condition. She had to treat me with dignity and ensure my care as I aged. If she failed in that duty, her inheritance would be revoked and transferred back to me. Coleman's eyes locked with mine. "By forcing you out, she broke the condition. Legally, her share is now yours. The estate totals $33 million, Margaret. You are the rightful owner of it all." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. $33 million. Mine? After being thrown into a motel, humiliated by my daughter, Suddenly the truth swung the pendulum completely in my favor. Tears welled up again, but this time they weren't only from grief. They carried relief, vindication, and yes, anger sharpened into resolve. So she lied, I whispered. She looked me in the eye, waved fake papers at me, and lied. Coleman nodded gravely. Not only that, if those papers are forged, we may be looking at fraud and elder abuse. I'll need to have them examined. But Margaret, you must understand, you are not powerless here. You have the law on your side. I left his office with copies of the real will tucked safely into my bag. My steps felt firmer, my spine straighter. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I felt like I could breathe again. Isabella thought she had crushed me, that I would fade away quietly. She was wrong. That afternoon, I returned to the motel. My phone buzzed with a new voicemail. Isabella's voice spilled out, frantic and sharp. "Mother, call me back immediately. There's been a mistake. We need to talk." I didn't call her back. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, listening to that message 3 times, each repeat hardening my resolve. She knew something was wrong. She was beginning to panic, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of hearing my voice just yet. Instead, I pulled out a notepad and began to write. Names, dates, every detail I could remember about Isabella and Daniel's behavior in the days before and after Richard's death. Coleman had told me to document everything. If Isabella wanted to drag this into a fight, I would be ready. That night, for the first time in days, I slept soundly. The mattress was still lumpy, the air still damp, but the difference was inside me. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I was the rightful heir to everything Richard had built. And if Isabella thought she could rewrite history with forged documents and cruelty, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I had lost my husband. I had lost the daughter I once knew, but I hadn't lost myself. Not yet. And as I closed my eyes, I knew one thing with certainty. The fight had only just begun. The next morning, my phone rang before the sun had even risen. The screen lit up with Isabella's name. I watched it buzz across the nightstand, my stomach twisting. After everything she had done, she still had the nerve to call me? I let it go to voicemail. Moments later, it rang again. Then again. By mid-morning, I had 10 missed calls and 3 increasingly desperate messages waiting. Her voice had shifted from commanding to panicked. "Mother, you need to call me. There's been a misunderstanding. Daniel and I just call me back." The last message trembled with an edge of hysteria. "If you don't answer, you'll regret this. You don't understand what's at stake." I sat on the motel bed, listening to them in silence. My heart pounded, but I refused to respond. Coleman's words echoed in my mind. "You have the law on your side." If I answered her, she would try to twist me into believing her lies again. No, not this time. By noon, I gathered the courage to call Coleman instead. His voice was calm, steady. "Margaret, don't engage with her. Every word she says is an attempt to manipulate you. Let her desperation work against her. In the meantime, I've sent the forged will to a handwriting expert. If it's proven fake, and I'm certain it will be, we can take immediate legal action." That knowledge steadied me. For so long, Isabella had held the power in our relationship. But now, with every unanswered call, I felt the scales tipping. That evening, I ventured out for the first time since Richard's funeral. I bought a modest dinner at a diner nearby, sliding into a booth by the window. The waitress poured me coffee, and I realized how long it had been since I'd felt like a normal person rather than a discarded burden. I pulled out the real will, reading the words over and over. Each sentence was like a lifeline Richard had left behind for me. He had trusted me, protected me even in death. That thought alone brought tears to my eyes. The phone rang again. The calls truly never stopped. 23 missed calls in one day. Isabella's desperation was boiling over, and that told me everything I needed to know. Something was unraveling on her end. The next morning, Coleman called with news. "Margaret, the will she gave you is a forgery. The signatures are traced, the notary stamp is fake, and the formatting is inconsistent with our records. There's no doubt about it. This isn't just family conflict anymore, it's fraud." My breath caught. Fraud. The word made everything heavier, more dangerous. Coleman continued. "I've already alerted the district attorney's office. They'll be opening a preliminary investigation. But there's something else you should know. Daniel has been flagged in a separate probe. His bank is being looked at for falsified loan documents. I nearly dropped the phone. So this isn't just about Isabella? No, Coleman said firmly. Daniel is in deeper than she probably realizes. The authorities will dig into both of them. I need you to be prepared for more calls, more threats. But do not answer them. Let them hang themselves with their own panic. For the rest of the week, my phone became a weapon turned against its owner. Every buzz, every vibration was proof of their unraveling. Some messages were angry Isabella shouting that I owed her, that she deserved the money. Others were pitiful, begging me to meet and work things out. The whiplash between cruelty and pleading told me exactly what I needed to know. Their empire of lies was collapsing. On the 5th day, Coleman called again. His tone was grave. Margaret, the DA's office has referred this case to the Financial Crimes Unit, and the FBI may get involved, given Daniel's connections. The FBI? The word tasted unreal on my tongue. I was just a widow, a mother who wanted peace. Now, suddenly, the federal government was stepping into my family's nightmare. Yes, Coleman said, and that's good for you. It means they'll uncover the full scope of what Daniel's been doing. It also means Isabella can't bully you anymore. This is out of her hands now. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from the sheer strangeness of it all. 3 weeks earlier, I had been the dutiful wife burying her husband. Now, I was the legal heir to $33 million, while my daughter's world crumbled around her. The irony was almost too much to grasp. At 2 a.m, my phone buzzed again. This time, I played the voicemail aloud, letting the tinny speaker fill the motel room. Isabella's voice cracked through the static. Mother, please. You don't understand. If you don't help us, we're finished. They're freezing everything, Daniel says. Her words dissolved into sobs. I pressed stop. For years, I had dreamed of hearing Isabella apologize, of seeing her stripped of arrogance. And now, here it was, though not in the way I imagined. Instead of healing, it felt like watching someone dig their own grave. The calls never stopped, but I had stopped answering. What Isabella didn't realize was that the moment she shoved me out of my home, she also shoved me out of her control. The investigation moved faster than I ever expected. Within days, Coleman informed me that the district attorney's office had reached out to federal authorities. Daniel's name was already on their radar, tied to suspicious financial transactions that stretched far beyond what Isabella could possibly comprehend. When I heard the words, organized fraud ring, my blood ran cold. For years, I had dismissed Daniel as nothing more than an arrogant banker who married my daughter for her looks and connections. But now, the truth was emerging. He was not only reckless, he was dangerous. Coleman arranged a meeting with a financial crimes investigator. Sitting across from him in a sterile government office, I felt my hands tremble as I recounted everything Isabella had done since Richard's death: the forged will, the eviction, the constant harassment. The investigator listened carefully, taking notes. When I mentioned that Richard had suspected shady dealings in Daniel's bank years ago, the man's expression tightened. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, leaning forward, we believe Daniel has been part of a network producing falsified financial records, shell accounts, phantom loans, laundered assets. If your daughter willingly used forged documents, she may have implicated herself. I felt my throat tighten. Isabella, my little girl, dragging herself into a pit she couldn't escape. Part of me wanted to cry for her, but another part, the part that had slept in a moldy motel after being cast out, stiffened with resolve. She had chosen her side. 2 days later, I received a letter slipped under my motel door. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded page in plain handwriting. Stop pushing this, or the truth about Richard comes out. My stomach dropped. The truth about Richard? I immediately called Coleman. He told me to stay calm and forward the note to investigators. Still, I couldn't shake the dread. What did they know about my late husband? When the investigators began probing deeper, more secrets spilled. Richard's name surfaced in connection with past business partners who were later indicted for money laundering. I sat frozen in Coleman's office as he explained what the records suggested. Margaret, he said gently, I know this is difficult, but there may have been activities Richard kept from you. The FBI is reviewing everything. It was as though the ground crumbled beneath my feet. My Richard, the man who always said he was working late at the firm, Could he have been involved in criminal activities? The thought made me sick. Meanwhile, the calls from Isabella only grew more frantic. She left me rambling messages, sometimes screaming, sometimes begging. One afternoon, she showed up outside the motel, pounding on my door until the manager threatened to call the police. Her voice cracked through the thin walls. "Mother, they're taking everything. Daniel says you have to stop this. Please, you don't understand what you're doing." I didn't open the door. I stood on the other side, tears streaming down my face, but I didn't move. For the first time, she needed me more than I needed her. The very next day, Coleman called with startling news. "Margaret, the FBI has made a preliminary determination about Richard. He wasn't laundering money for himself. He was cooperating. He worked with them, undercover." I nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean?" "He was passing information. The assets he left were clean. The suspicions were intentional, a cover. The FBI has records of his cooperation. Whatever Isabella and Daniel think they can use against you, it won't hold. Richard wasn't a criminal. He was helping catch them." The relief hit me like a wave. For days I had doubted the man I'd loved for decades, doubted my own marriage. Now, to hear he had actually been fighting crime behind the scenes, it felt like a strange, bittersweet redemption. But the threats from Daniel's side didn't stop. His family reached out through back channels, offering to settle quietly if I relinquished claims to the estate. Their tone dripped with menace. One cousin even hissed over the phone, "Old woman, you don't know who you're messing with. Back off or you'll regret it." I recorded every word and sent it to the FBI. That night, lying in the motel's stiff bed, I realized the game had changed. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was about justice, about standing against people who believed they could bully me into silence. The next morning, Coleman arranged a meeting with the FBI agents handling Richard's file. They laid it out clearly. Daniel was tied to fraudulent financial activity, Isabella had used forged documents, and both could face federal charges. But then one agent leaned closer. "Mrs. Whitmore, we need your help. We believe Isabella and Daniel are planning to pressure you into signing over rights to part of the estate. If you're willing, you could record their attempt. It would give us grounds for immediate action." My first instinct was fear. Me? Wear a wire? Go face to face with the daughter who had already thrown me out? But then I thought of Richard. I thought of the motel nights, the endless calls, the threats. I thought of the $33 million he had meant to secure my future, not hand over to crooks. I nodded. "Tell me what I have to do." From that moment on, the fear in my chest hardened into something else. Determination. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. As I left the FBI office, the sunlight felt different, brighter, as though the world itself had shifted. Isabella still thought she held the power. She didn't realize she was walking straight into a trap of her own making. And I, the mother she cast aside, was about to become the key to her downfall. When I agreed to help the FBI, I knew my life was no longer my own. Every movement felt charged with tension. I woke each morning in that motel room, listening for footsteps in the hallway, wondering if Isabella or Daniel had sent someone to follow me. Fear lived under my skin, but alongside it was a new, unfamiliar strength. I had been dismissed, humiliated, and cast aside. Now I held the truth in my hands, and the law stood behind me. The FBI wasted no time. They brought me into their office, a stark room with pale walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. An agent named Carter, tall with a steady voice, laid out the situation. "Mrs. Whitmore, Daniel is tangled in a larger network we've been chasing for years. He isn't just a greedy son-in-law. He's part of a syndicate that forges financial records, launders money, and manipulates banking systems. Your daughter, unfortunately, has tied herself to his crimes." Obling. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay upright. "And Richard? I need to know the truth about my husband." Carter exchanged a glance with his colleague before speaking. "Richard worked with us. For more than a decade, he was a confidential asset. He fed us information from inside that same syndicate. We couldn't expose him, even to you, for his safety and yours. Those odd business trips, those long nights away, they were covers. He wasn't betraying you, Mrs. Whitmore. He was protecting this country. I felt my breath leave me in a rush. For weeks I had wrestled with the idea that Richard had been complicit in crime. To hear he had been a spy of sorts, living in the shadows for justice, cracked something open inside me. My grief shifted, not lighter exactly, but clearer. He hadn't abandoned me. He had trusted me enough to carry the truth forward when he was gone. The agents slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were reports, receipts, and transcripts from years of surveillance. There was even a photo of Richard sitting in a cafe, speaking quietly with a man later convicted of fraud. Every dollar in his estate is legitimate, Carter assured me. He worked tirelessly to separate clean assets from dirty ones. That's why he structured the will so carefully. He wanted you protected. I closed the folder with trembling hands. For the first time since the funeral, I felt Richard's presence like a steady hand on my shoulder. He had thought of me, even as he lived a double life. He had known Isabella's arrogance, Daniel's greed, and he had built safeguards for the moment they turned against me. But as comforting as the truth was, danger loomed. Daniel's associates had caught wind of the investigation. Threats came more openly now, emails, anonymous letters, even a car idling too long across from the motel. Coleman urged me to let the FBI relocate me temporarily, but I refused. I wasn't going to hide while my daughter and her husband tried to paint me as the villain. That week, Isabella's calls grew even more frenzied. In one message, her voice cracked with desperation. "Mother, listen to me. They're freezing accounts. Daniel is panicking. And if you don't help us, everything will collapse. Do you understand? You'll be left with nothing too." Nothing. That word almost made me laugh. She had no idea I already knew the truth. The money was safe. The will was ironclad. She was the one dangling over the edge, clawing at me as if I might pull her back. Still, there was one card she tried to play. Richard's reputation. Daniel's family spread whispers in town that Richard had been a crook, that I was clinging to dirty money. They wanted me cornered, shamed into silence. But when the FBI showed me documentation of Richard's cooperation, I realized I had nothing to fear. The truth was stronger than rumor. The agents asked me to take part in the next step, a sting operation. Isabella and Daniel were planning to negotiate with me, demanding I sign over rights to certain investments in exchange for their silence about Richard's alleged crimes. Carter explained the plan. I would wear a small recording device during the meeting. My role was simple: listen, stay calm, and let them incriminate themselves. The night before the meeting, I sat alone in the motel, staring at the device on the table. A part of me still longed for the daughter I once knew, the girl who had braided her doll's hair beside me, who had slipped drawings under my door with the words, "I love you, Mommy." Facing her now, with the knowledge she was plotting extortion, felt like watching that little girl die all over again. But I reminded myself of the motel nights, of being shoved out into the rain, of her cold voice telling me, "Pack your things." She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. The next morning, I met the agents in a van parked near the restaurant where the meeting would take place. They clipped the recording device beneath my blouse and handed me a small earpiece. "We'll be listening the entire time," Carter said. "If things turn dangerous, we'll move in. But you have to keep them talking." End of 2. I nodded, my palms slick with sweat. As I stepped into the restaurant, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Isabella and Daniel were already seated at a corner booth, their faces tense. Isabella's eyes widened when she saw me, a flicker of relief crossing her features before she masked it with arrogance. "Mother," she said, sliding a folder across the table, "we need to clear the air. You don't want this family torn apart in court. Sign these documents, and we'll keep everything private." Her tone was sharp, but beneath it I caught the tremor of fear. Daniel leaned back, arms crossed, his jaw tight. "You don't want the world digging into Richard's past, do you? Help us, and no one has to know." For a moment, the weight of their betrayal pressed on me. Then I remembered Richard's folder, the FBI's assurances, and the truth I carried in my chest. I opened the documents slowly, pretending to read. Inside, I saw nothing but greed, a desperate attempt to claw back what they had already lost. I lifted my gaze, meeting Isabella's eyes. "You lied to me about your father's will. You forced me out of my own home. And now you want me to help you hide your crimes. Why should I?" Her face flushed red, her voice breaking. "Because we're family. Because if you don't, Daniel and I will be ruined." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. Sign it, or everything comes out. Your husband wasn't a saint, and neither are you. I leaned back, my voice steady. If you think threats will save you, you've forgotten who you're talking to. I am Richard's wife. I survived his secrets. I'll survive yours. At that moment, a team of agents swept into the restaurant. The earpiece crackled as Carter's voice said, "That's enough." Isabella gasped, Daniel cursed, and within seconds they were surrounded. The folder was seized, the recording secured. For the first time, the weight of justice pressed down on them instead of me. As the agents led them away, Isabella twisted in her captor's grip, shouting, "Mother, please, don't let them do this, help me." But her cries fell flat. I sat frozen in the booth, a strange mix of grief and triumph coursing through me. I hadn't wanted it to end this way. But she had left me no choice. When I stepped back into the sunlight, Carter met me with a reassuring nod. "You did exactly what we needed. This will hold up in court." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my chest ease. Richard's secrets were safe. My future was secure. And my daughter, tragically, by her own choices, was finally facing the consequences she had earned. The day after the arrests, I woke up to silence. For weeks, my phone had been buzzing constantly. Calls, voicemails, threats, pleas, now, nothing. The quiet felt almost alien, but it was a relief. I lay there in the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that for the first time since Richard's funeral, I wasn't bracing myself for Isabella's voice. Still, peace didn't come easily. My daughter's face haunted me. The memory of her shouting at me to pack my things, the arrogance in her smile when she waved that forged will, and then the desperation when the FBI closed in it all replayed in loops. Grief and anger warred inside me. She was my child, but she had chosen greed over love, betrayal over loyalty. That afternoon, Coleman met me at the FBI office. His expression was grim but steady. "Margaret, Isabella, and Daniel are being held, but the process won't be quick. They'll have hearings, their lawyers will fight, and their families are already trying to stir the pot." I nodded, gripping my purse. "They won't stop until they've dragged me through the mud, will they?" "No," he admitted. "But you've got the truth on your side. And more than that, you've got proof." Agent Carter joined us, spreading documents across the table. "The recordings you provided sealed the case. They attempted extortion, and that alone will carry weight in court. But Daniel's ties to the fraud syndicate go deeper. This isn't over. His associates may try to retaliate, and Isabella, well, she may not realize how far in She Island. You need to prepare yourself, Mrs. Whitmore. This fight is about more than money. It's about survival." The word survival struck me like a bell. I thought about Richard, how he had lived his life under the weight of secrets, balancing on the edge of danger for the sake of justice. Now it was my turn to carry that torch. The FBI offered protective custody, but I refused. I was tired of hiding in motels, tired of being treated as fragile. "I'll stay in my home," I told them firmly. "It's mine, and I won't let them take it from me again." So I returned to the house Richard built, the house Isabella had tried to steal from me. Walking through the front door, I paused, breathing in the familiar scent of wood polish and faint lavender. The rooms looked the same, but everything felt different. I wasn't the broken widow dragging a suitcase into the rain anymore. I was the rightful owner, standing in my place. Still, the walls whispered of betrayal. I walked past the dining room table where Isabella had shoved those forged papers across to me. I paused at Richard's study, running my hand across the shelves of books he had loved. For a moment, my chest ached with longing. If only he were here to see it, to explain why he had carried so many secrets. But then I remembered. He had trusted me to uncover the truth when the time came, and I had. The calls from Daniel's associates began within days. Some were subtle veiled threats about bad press or family secrets. Others were blunt, warning me to drop the charges or face consequences. Each time, I recorded the message and handed it to the FBI. Each time, the agents urged me to stay strong. But it wasn't just about defense anymore. I wanted to strike back. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light through the windows, I sat with Coleman at my kitchen table. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life just reacting," I said. "Richard didn't spend his life in the shadows just for me to cower. If they think they can intimidate me, I'll show them otherwise." He studied me carefully. What are you suggesting? I want to fight, not just for myself, but for others. I know what it feels like to be stripped of dignity by your own family, to have your security yanked away in a moment. How many others have been through the same? How many elders are taken advantage of every single day? Coleman leaned back slowly, a small smile forming. You're talking about more than surviving. You're talking about building something. That night, the idea of the Elder Protection Foundation was born. It wasn't official yet, just a dream scribbled in a notebook, but it gave me purpose. I wouldn't let my story end with betrayal and fear. I would turn it into something larger, something that could shield others from predators, whether they were strangers or their own blood. As plans formed in my mind, the FBI kept me looped into their case against Daniel. More evidence surfaced: falsified loan portfolios, offshore accounts, emails tying him to a web of fraud. Isabella, caught in the middle, claimed ignorance, but the recordings of her extortion attempt spoke louder than her tears. It was strange, seeing the daughter I had raised unravel in front of the law. Some nights, I cried quietly, remembering the child she once was. But every time I wavered, I thought of that night in the rain, dragging my suitcase out of the only home I had known. That memory steeled me. I was no longer just Richard's widow. I was Margaret Whitmore, heir to $33 million, partner to the FBI, founder of something new. And for the first time in years, I felt alive with purpose. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready. The weeks leading up to the hearings felt like living inside a storm. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, their cameras flashing as soon as I appeared. Headlines painted Isabella and Daniel as victims of family betrayal, twisting the truth for clicks. At first, it stung. I wanted to scream that I hadn't stolen anything, that it was my daughter who had lied, forged, and schemed. But I learned quickly that silence could be louder than protest. The truth was in the evidence, not the gossip. When the first hearing began, I took my place in the courtroom. The air buzzed with tension. Isabella sat across the aisle, her face pale, eyes ringed with dark shadows. She looked smaller than I remembered, her confidence stripped away. Daniel, in contrast, sat rigid, jaw tight, staring at the judge with a defiance that fooled no one. Coleman leaned toward me. Remember, Margaret, you don't need to say much. The recordings, the documents, the FBI reports, they'll do the work. All you need to do is stay steady. I nodded, folding my hands in my lap, but inside, I was boiling. I had been humiliated, cast out, treated like a nuisance by my own child. Now the world would see the truth. The prosecution began with the forged will, laying out in painstaking detail how the handwriting expert proved it false. They showed the jury side-by-side comparisons, the mismatched notary seal, the digital tracing marks. Every revelation chipped away at Isabella's credibility. She shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting toward me, but I didn't flinch. Then came the recordings. My heart thudded as my own voice echoed through the speakers, calm and measured, as Isabella pleaded with me to sign away rights to the estate. The words filled the room. Because we're family. Because if you don't, we'll be ruined. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Isabella buried her face in her hands. Daniel's turn came next. The FBI presented emails linking him to fraudulent bank loans, shell companies, and laundering schemes. Charts and graphs showed how millions of dollars flowed through his accounts like water through a sieve. His lawyer objected, claiming entrapment, but the evidence was overwhelming. During a recess, I walked past Isabella in the hallway. For a moment, our eyes met. She looked at me with tears glistening, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak. But I kept walking. I had spent too many years carrying her burdens. This was hers to bear now. Back in the courtroom, Daniel finally cracked. Under cross-examination, his temper flared. He snapped at the prosecutor, his voice rising, accusing the system of targeting him unfairly. The judge silenced him with a stern warning, but the damage was done. The jury saw him for what he was, a man who believed rules didn't apply to him. By the end of the week, the verdict was clear. Isabella and Daniel were found guilty of fraud, attempted extortion, and conspiracy. Sentencing would come later, but the weight of the decision filled the room like a thunderclap. Isabella wept openly, clutching Daniel's arm as officers escorted them out. He pulled away, his face twisted with rage. As I left the courthouse, reporters swarmed me again. Microphones shoved toward my face, questions flying. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have anything to say about your daughter's conviction? Do you feel vindicated?" I stopped at the steps, lifting my chin. "This isn't about vindication," I said firmly. "It's about justice. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. What happened to me happens to far too many people, especially the elderly. But I want the world to know, you are not powerless. You can fight back, and you can win." The cameras flashed wildly, but I felt strangely calm. My words weren't rehearsed. They came from a place deep inside me, a place that had been silenced for too long. That evening, I returned to my house. The silence inside was different now, not heavy, not haunted, but peaceful. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the books Richard once loved. For the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own life. Later that week, I signed the official paperwork establishing the Elder Protection Foundation. My story had drawn attention, and support poured in from strangers across the country. Donations, letters, even invitations to speak at events. I realized I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was building a legacy. Isabella and Daniel awaited sentencing, their futures uncertain. Mine, however, stretched out before me with clarity. I would not waste what Richard left me. I would not let betrayal define me. As I stood on my porch one evening, watching the sun sink low, I whispered to myself, "The sweetest revenge isn't destroying them. It's living stronger, freer, and louder than they ever thought I could." And with that, I stepped back into my home not as a victim, not as a grieving widow, but as a woman reborn. 6 months passed before the final sentencing. By then, the whirlwind of media attention had slowed, though the echoes remained. I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, no longer the trembling widow who had once dragged a suitcase into the rain. Isabella sat beside Daniel, both of them thinner, paler, and stripped of the arrogance they once wore like armor. When the judge read out the decision, 18 months in federal prison for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy, neither lifted their eyes. I should have felt triumph. Instead, what I felt was closure. Justice had been served. My role was not to dance on the ruins of their downfall, but to make sure no one else endured what I had. The weeks following the sentencing were busy. The Elder Protection Foundation, once only scribbles in a notebook, became reality. With part of the inheritance Richard left me, I established a fund to provide legal aid, counseling, and resources for seniors facing financial abuse. Calls came in daily from people who had been manipulated by their own families, tricked into signing away homes, or bullied into silence. Each story cut into me, but it also fueled my determination. I knew exactly how they felt. In between meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, and volunteers, I allowed myself to rediscover life. I redecorated the house not to erase Richard, but to create something that was mine. The heavy drapes were replaced with light curtains. The dining room, once filled with tension and betrayal, became a space for community dinners hosted by the foundation. The walls echoed not with Isabella's cruel words, but with laughter, conversation, and hope. For the first time in decades, I explored passions I had put aside. I picked up a paintbrush, something I hadn't done since I was a girl. At first, my strokes were shaky, my colors muddied. But over time, my paintings grew bolder, bright landscapes, portraits filled with resilience. Each canvas was proof that I was more than a victim, more than a wife, more than a mother defined by her daughter's betrayal. I was me, Margaret Whitmore, reborn in color. Occasionally, letters arrived from Isabella. Some were angry, blaming me for her downfall. Others were pitiful, pleading for reconciliation. I read them all, then tucked them away in a drawer. My heart ached, but I never replied. To forgive blindly would be to forget the motel, the forged will, the endless calls meant to break me. Family isn't determined by blood alone, it's determined by who protects and cherishes you. Isabella had shown me who she was, and I had finally learned to believe her. One afternoon, a documentary crew arrived. They wanted to tell Richard's story, to honor his years of undercover work. Sitting before the cameras, I spoke not only of him, but of what came after, how his will, his foresight, and his love had carried me through betrayal. I shared the story of my own fight, how I had gone from motel despair to courtroom victory. When the director asked me what I considered my greatest revenge, I smiled softly. "The sweetest revenge," I said, "is not seeing them punished. It's seeing myself stronger than they ever believed I could be. They thought they'd broken me, but I rose, and I'll keep rising. As the sun set that evening, I stood on the porch, gazing across the garden. The air was warm, carrying the scent of lilacs. I felt Richard's presence there, not as a shadow of grief, but as a quiet strength urging me forward. My life wasn't over, it was just beginning again. So when people ask me what happened after my daughter threw me out, I tell them the truth. I found myself. I found my voice. And I found that justice, though it may move slowly, will always arrive for those who refuse to surrender. If you've ever been underestimated, cast aside, or silenced, let this story be proof. You are stronger than they think. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't what you do to others, it's what you become in spite of them. So tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight for your worth when even family turned against you? And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, stories of resilience and revenge, are only just beginning.